Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in Freshman English. We now turn in our MyPerspectives freshman volume to page 230 and following, Naomi Shihab Nye's Hugging the Jukebox. Now, let's begin going back to our introductory page on page 225. First of all, let's learn a little bit about the background. A jukebox, and obviously Hugging the Jukebox is a strange title. A jukebox is a device that contains a number of vinyl records and a record player. Some of you maybe have still seen these in old stores or antique stores. The user typically would insert money, select which record to play. Jukeboxes were often found in dance halls and restaurants, and people could select the music for the crowd to hear. Jukeboxes were a major method of playing popular music for much of the 20th century. And in fact, if you talk to your parents or your grandparents, they will tell you about the experiences of putting money in and hitting the button and getting, the record to play. Now, Naomi Shihab Nye, of course, such an important poet in 303. You can find it, Learn Strong, do a search, and you'll see a number of the poems that we have already worked with, Nye's work. Born in 1952. Her experience as a woman of mixed Palestinian and American heritage give her a unique perspective. Before attending college in Texas, she lived in Palestine, Jerusalem. In her writing, she often celebrates the extraordinary nature of everyday ordinary life. After the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center, Nye became an activist for Arab Americans, advocating for peace and tolerance. Let's turn now to the reading of this text, and then we'll do a bit of discussions at level 2 and 3.
Hugging the Jukebox. Naomi Shihab Nye. On an island, the soft hue of memory, moss green, kerosene yellow, drifting, mingling in the Caribbean Sea. A 6-year-old named Alfred learns all the words to all the songs on his grandparents' jukebox and sings them. To learn the words is not so hard. Many barmaids and teenagers have done as well. But to sing as Alfred sings, how can a giant whale live in the small pool of his chest? How can there be breakers this high, notes crashing at the beach of the throat, and a reef of coral so enormous, only the fishes know its size? The grandparents watch. They can't sing. They don't know who this voice is, trapped in their grandson's body. The boy whose parents sent him back to the island to chatter mango talk and scrap with chickens 3 years ago, he didn't know the word sad. Now he strings 100 passionate sentences on a single line. He bangs his fist so they will raise the volume. What will they do together in their old age? It is hard enough keeping yourself alive. And this wild boy, loving nothing but music, he'll sing all night, hugging the jukebox. When a record pauses, that live second before dropping down, Alfred hugs tighter, arms stretched wide, head pressed on the luminous belly. Now, he yells, a half smile when the needle breathes again. They've tried putting him to bed, but he sings in bed, even in Spanish, and he doesn't speak Spanish. Sings and screams, wants to go back to the jukebox. Oh mama, I was born with a trumpet in my throat, spent all these years trying to cough it up. He can't even read yet. He can't tell time. But he sings, and the chairs in this old dance hall jerk to attention. The grandparents lean on the counter, shaking their heads. The customers stop talking and stare, goosey bumps surfacing on their arms. His voice carries out to the water, where boats are tied, and sings for all of them. A wave. For the hens, now roosting in trees. For the mute boy next door, his second best friend. And for the hurricane, now brewing near Barbados. A week forward, neighbors will be hammering boards over their windows, rounding up dogs and fishing lines. The generators will quit with solemn clicks in every yard. But Alfred, hugging a sleeping jukebox, the names of the tunes gone dark, will still be singing, doubly loud now, teasing his grandmother. Put a coin in my mouth, and believing what she wants to believe. This is not the end of the island, or the tablets this life has been scribbled on, or the song. Utila Honduras.
Now, the genius of this poem, and I mean, let's just say that it is, we love Nye's poetry because of the very thing we're about to point out. The genius of this poem is the way in which it works on so many levels. Notice, we are, of course, in a unit on survival. And so obviously the question is, what kind of survival, or really what we should ask, survivals, are being addressed in this poem? Notice that this will be a poem that's ostensibly about an island that will somehow try to survive a hurricane. And yet behind all of that will be the young boy Alfred, who at 6 is already learning all of the songs, the languages, the stories. We, of course, have a saying in 303. We are the stories we tell, the stories we retell, the stories we accept, the stories we reject. And here, of course, learning to hug the jukebox is in some ways, well, right, an adoption of a certain kind of art form, and therefore, of course, a certain kind of cultural understanding as well. Notice the questions that will be asked in the first stanza at line 10 through 13. Notice we'll begin with, how can a giant whale live in the small pool of his chest? In other words, he feels such power in the music and the words of the music. How can there be breakers? We're going to get to the wave, obviously, that will, in large measure, have some damage to the island and to possibly others as well. This high notes crashing at the beach of the throat. We're going to get to this thing about the throat and some reference possibly to the great Miles Davis and his trumpet a little bit later in this poem. Come crashing at the beach of the throat in a reef of coral so enormous only the fishes know its size. In other words, music is transcendent. In other words, let's put it as a possible two-way message already. One of the ways we survive trauma of any number of kinds is through art, and in this case, of course, music. Now, of course, the grandparents, who you get the sense that the grandparents are probably the ones who maybe own a small little bar or something on the island there. The grandparents are the ones who will kind of marvel. Notice, they can't sing. They don't know who this voice is trapped in their grandson's body, right? And he'll sing 100 passionate sentences on a single line. Notice we have the then and the now being compared. Language, obviously, acquisition is a big part of this. And then another question, what will they do together in their old age? Again, notice old age is a form of survival in this poem. It's hard enough keeping yourself alive. And this wild boy, loving nothing but music, he'll sing all night, and then we get the title, obviously, Hugging the Jukebox. The idea of when the personification that will happen here, that the big box is perceived as a body itself, the luminous belly where the albums, the LPs will drop down, right? A half smile when the needle breathes again. And for those of you that have never heard the sound of an LP and the needle in the groove of an LP, there is a certain kind of sound that almost does sound like a certain type of breathing. Then on to the next stanza. They've tried putting him to bed, but he just keeps singing in bed, even Spanish. He doesn't even speak Spanish. And then, of course, the famous line here in italics, oh, mama, I was born with a trumpet in my throat, spent all these years trying to cough it up. Obviously a reference to jazz and the amazing jazz trumpet players we think of, the greatest of them all in Miles Davis. Notice, he can't read and he can't tell time, but he sings, and he sings with this music. And then all of them, he says, all of this will carry. He sings for all of them. And then notice in italics, a wave. Of course, the hurricane now brewing near Barbados, that is to say, we got a storm coming, right? And that is to say, a week forward, neighbors will be hammering boards over their windows because of the destruction of the storm, rounding up dogs and fishing lines. The generators will quit with solemn clicks in every yard. But Alfred, right, hugging us. Notice now it's a sleeping jukebox, probably sleeping because the electricity now will be gone from the island. So the only thing he could do now is to name the tunes in the dark, and then say, teasing his grandma, why don't you put a coin in my mouth and I can sing the songs on and on to try to find a way to survive this experience. Well, what's really going on here? Again, we said it, let's put it in our notes. The power of art to survive. to being, of course, the personification here is brilliant. And then at level 3A, of course, we can ask about the writer and how does a poem like this work with the writer. Of course, notice we have children who are performing art, and we have adults who are appreciating the fact that children are performing art, trying to find a way to survive and to get through. Of course, this does beg the question at level 3B, what is for you the text that could get you through the worst imaginable of storms, waves, hurricanes? What is that song? What is that poem? What is that text? What is that game that maybe you play that kind of gets you through the experience so that you can survive, right? So that you can get together. That is to say, we always come together when we have to survive. Of course, Shihab Nye is always reminding us of that. Brilliant, brilliant poet. Thank you.